The F1 CEO is bringing huge changes to F1 and nobody's happy about them. Ferrari is set to bring the biggest set of upgrades this whole season in hopes to win Monza. Cadillac makes a new change to its driver lineup for 2026. Do consider subbing to the channel. Let's get straight into the latest F1 news. So guys, this might be the biggest power move or the worst mistake an F1 CEO has ever made in their career. So Stefano Domenicali, if you guys don't know, right now I'm reporting the latest news on F1. If these rules come to fruition, Stefano Domenicali is wants to bring reverse grids, shorter races, and sprint races all across the season into F1. So firstly, let's start with reverse grid. So reverse grid conversation has been around for a while. I'm sure you guys have heard about reverse grids for a long time. Depending on how long you guys have been watching F1, reverse grids have always been something we've, dabbled in, but no one has really, it's never really got on. But now Stefano is bringing it back, um, and he wants us to have reverse grids. And here's my take on reverse grids. I think reverse grids could work, but only in certain scenarios. So here's the thing: if you do a reverse grid normally, you have qualifying and then you have your reverse grid race. What usually will happen is some drivers will obviously try and qualify a little bit lower than they would, knowing that the grid will get reversed, and then they would go much closer to the top, because obviously points are awarded in the Grand Prix or in the race, sprint races. So the best way to do this would then to have is then to have sprint races have reverse grids, but only the top 10. So something like they have in F2. So in F2 they have reverse grids, top 10, and then something like that. And then what they can still do is then give points for qualifying. So then they can have sprint qualifying, points for qualifying, reverse grid, points for the race. So maybe qualifying is like top 6 get points for qualifying, and then top 12 get points for the race, for the sprint race. And then so it's like a point each till 1 point for 12, then 12 points for first. And same thing for qualifying. Sixth would get 1 point and first would get 6 points, something like that. So if they can do it in a way where it doesn't make drivers, try and game the system, then I think it can really work. Another thing is short races. So basically, all these changes that Stefano is talking about is trying to bring in new, younger audience, which I mean I get, because the sport does need newer, younger audiences to stay alive. And that's why the Drive to Survive boom was such a success, because those younger audience who are like more into the drama and stuff. Which I mean, a lot of people don't like Drive to Survive. I think we can all agree on that. People who came from Drive to Survive usually aren't how can I say, they usually aren't the most knowledgeable fans we have in the sport. And bringing in this kind of changes will make that even worse, because it does take away some of the core of Formula One. And that's where most people already aren't liking this rule, because they're like, these new rules, obviously the rules haven't been approved. It's still something in the talking stage. That's the founder is talking about. And some of these things, what happens is the higher ups, the bosses, will test these rules or these things by just saying them, even if they don't have much substance. And then based on their reaction, they'll then gauge on like, okay, should we bring this? Should we do this? How can we refine this? And then things like that. So obviously that's something they probably are gauging now by then, expressing this and having online feedback on it. So I think reverse grids can work, but it's a maybe. So that's my verdict on that. I obviously want to know what you guys think in the comments below. And shorter races, that one, to some extent, yeah, because some races these days are kind of boring. So it's like 70 laps and it's kind of the same thing. It's basically just, there isn't much happening. But at the same time, the core value of Formula One has stayed the same since it started in 1950s. Like having qualifying, having a 300-kilometer race, and having points for the main race, as that's the Grand Prix. The Grand Prix. Your Sundays are booked. Depending on what you guys do on Sundays, if you chill, if you go somewhere else, whatever. But Sundays are booked for Formula One races whenever there's a race weekend. So now having shorter races is probably gonna just, that one I'm not a fan of. I don't think there's a way they can do that that would make it work like reverse grids. Reverse grids, if done right, could work, but otherwise, I'm not a fan of short races. I think the 300-kilometer races need to stay the way they are. F1 should stay the way it is when it comes to Grand Prix racing, and we shouldn't change that. If we're gonna experiment, let's experiment with sprint races. And the other thing is, when it comes to sprint races, is this is the third thing that the CEO wants to bring is MotoGP style sprint races. As we know, for those of you who do watch MotoGP, I don't really watch MotoGP, but I do know that they do have sprint races basically every single week, race week. So they have sprint races, then they have the Grand Prix on Sundays. So if we're gonna have the same thing of sprint races every single week, I think that might be a little bit too much. If we're really gonna push sprint races, let's just say half of the um, of the F1 calendar. That's not a bad idea. But then having every single week, that feels like a lot. Obviously, from the F1 side, the commercial side, it's like, that's cool. And you know what's funny is when F1 sprint started in 2021, the Hamilton versus Verstappen year, we had, I think, three, if I'm not mistaken, three or something. I'm not sure. You guys will correct me if I'm wrong, but we had three, and three races was testing. Now we have what, six, and six races is not bad. I think we could still do more, maybe eight or so, 8 or 10. We could still do more because I do feel like the gap between them is a bit much. We haven't had a sprint race in a while now, but we could do like 8 or 10. And what's funny is when they started and when we had the ground effect era come into play with Max Verstappen dominating. Obviously, Max Verstappen is blunt. He's straight to the point, and he was one of the biggest, I can say, haters of sprint races when they came along. He was like, it's just a waste of time. Like, what's the point? It's just another, basically, qualifying session races, and it's like it's not really. There's nothing much to it when it came. But now that Max Verstappen is no longer dominating, obviously now he's more on the side of like, oh, let's have sprints. But this isn't anything against Max. I think this is just when you're dominating, when someone is dominating, obviously they're gonna choose something that keeps that dominance. So if there's anything that changes it, they're obviously not gonna like it. So I think even if any other driver was in the same position, they'll be the same thing. They'll be like, oh, let's bring sprint races back. Or if they were dominating, they'll be like, nah, why do we need sprint races? We don't need sprint races. But my verdict on sprint races, honestly, is we have enough sprint races. We can add a little bit more, like I say, maybe to 8 or 10 per season, and kind of work on that, and then use the sprint races to test all these other formats like reverse grids, one shot qualifying, all these other crazy formats or unique formats we would like. Test them first on sprint races. If they're really good, then we can add them, to the main Grand Prix. Because there's so many other things that we can do. Another thing that's interesting is that working with different point system. For example, Tomo did a video, Tomo F1. If you guys do watch Tomo F1's content, he did a video not too long ago about how having points for each position, or having points for, like, let's say the top 15, that would be so cool, because sometimes you have drivers in the back like Oli Behrman, he did mention, who then has like Oli Behrman, who has like multiple P11s, but then obviously it doesn't show on the points because you don't get points for P11. But if you get points till that position, then that would be much better. So yeah, those are changes that I could be like, most people would fall behind, because it's like, okay, that's pretty cool. So yeah, but some we have had some. This is the full article. I'll obviously leave it linked below, and you guys can just go through it. But I'm just going through basically all the news that's there, and yeah. So that's my take on the new the new changes that the boss wants to bring, and we'll see what gets what gets thrown into F1 and what gets thrown out. But that's basically my opinion. You guys will leave your comments below. And coming into the next news, which is another set of changes, would be the V8s. This is also leave the link below, but this is the V8s of how we want to bring back V8s into Formula One. So if we're being honest, the V6s are kind of mid. They're okay. They are really efficient engines. They really did push technology to like another level. But if we're really being honest, as F1 engines, as motorsport engines, they didn't have that flair, that V8s, V10s, V12s had before them. They were kind of okay, as racing engines. They were technologically, they were like the best we've ever had, the best there's ever existed in terms of technology. But then as engines themselves, for motorsport, they were okay. And bringing back V8s would be so cool. But now the problem is with the new regulations coming in next year, I don't think it's wise to then have new talks of like, because we already had other teams like Audi joining specifically for engines, and then we have Cadillac joining, which is also gonna make its own engines. So now if we're gonna have changes, then it's gonna make it a bit weird. So if we push the changes to like 20, because these current regulations are set for 2031, which is like the minimum when something new could happen. So till then, we would likely stay with the new V6s we're gonna have with the 50-50 split, which is, as far as we know right now, the drivers, the technical directors, the technical engineering people, they are not a fan. Even the drivers in the sim, most of them, they're not a fan of it with the 50-50 split. And I also like, as F1 fans, having an engine that's like 500 horsepower, like that doesn't really make sense for him. That makes some engines in other categories more powerful. Like F2 engines are like what, 600 horsepower. We have WEC engines are around 700 horsepower. We have, what's another top tier racing? Super Formula, I think, is also around 700 horsepower. Same with Super GT 500. They also have around that range. So I mean, F1 engines are now weaker than all those series. Obviously, now with the electric boost, they still are the some of the most powerful engines in racing. But as engines alone, the engine itself is weaker. Obviously the whole power unit is still pretty strong, but that doesn't make sense. Like F1 should be like, leading the pack in like, it doesn't make sense. So that is my frustration when it comes to this, and most people's frustration. So that's why I do get where the frustration comes from. But then switching to V8s also doesn't make sense now. I think if it comes to switching to V8s, we should then wait for a little bit of time till we then switch to V8. So that's honestly my take on V8s. And another thing that's gonna come that people are changing, or that rather F1 wants to change and bring, is new tracks. So this is something I think we can all hop on board. So we've got 3 tracks right now that are um, on board, or that are likely to come back as it stands. Hockenheim, that's been off the calendar for a long time. Like a lot of fans, modern fans, got into the sport, and Hockenheim wasn't even on the grid anymore. I think the last race we had was 2019. No, 2020 rather. 2020. My mistake. We had a race in 2020, obviously with calendar that was a mess because of the global pandemic, but we haven't had a race for a long time at Hockenheim. No, Hockenheim, I'm wrong. Nürburgring was 2020. Hockenheim was 2019. Yes, 2019. We all remember 2019, especially if you were a Mercedes fan, you remember 2019. So we haven't had 29 Hockenheim for a long time, and it should be coming back hopefully soon. We'll see how it goes. Sorry guys for my ads on the screen, unfortunately, but yeah, we should have Hockenheim soon. Another one I really want is Istanbul. Istanbul is a really good one. Like I remember the 2021 race. That was one of the best and most exciting races we had of that season. 2021 was kind of those races. Um, I mean, the 2021 race was one of those races throughout the season that was like, something is happening, but it's like it just kept you on the edge of your feet because the race never got dry. The track never really got dry, and it was like, and obviously with the white Red Bull, this was a stunning livery on the Red Bull car, and we had Valtteri Bottas' only win for the whole season. So this was a really good race, Same with the 2020 race. Lewis Hamilton's seventh championship race win when he won the championship. Another really good race. I think they should also bring these tracks. Honestly, when it comes to tracks, I think having a rotating calendar of some tracks would be really cool. Obviously now, Formula One is moving towards pay to win kind of tracks. So the more money you pay, you get on the calendar. That's why we have a lot of races in the Middle East because money is plentiful. The money is no object that side. So it's like, those are the tracks that are F1 is tending more. Same with the Formula One. Formula One also tending towards United States races. Multiple races in the US now, Miami, Las Vegas. Las Vegas was a good race last year. So hopefully, as long as it's a good race, honestly, that's what really matters. So yeah, that's what I can say when it comes to the tracks. And Portimao is the other one. Portimao is also a nice track. It's not the best track for racing, based on what we had in 2021. It's not the best track for racing, but for like just to watch, it's more of a driver's track. It's something like Zandvoort. Zandvoort doesn't produce the best racing, but it has like it's such a nice track, like even in the games, if you do play the games, it's like such a nice track. Even when it comes to just watching qualifying, it's one of those tracks that's like so flowing and like the undulation, it's really cool. It's like a roller coaster. It's a really good track, that one. So I think Istanbul is one of my favorites. I'd like to see it come back. And I'm not sure about the other tracks. Hockenheim has been on talks for a while now, but nothing has come of it. And yeah, so those are basically the changes coming into F1. Now let's get into the news for this weekend. We've got Ferrari. We've got the Ferrari. Okay, Ferrari is a very, yeah. If you're a Ferrari fan, which I am, it's a very interesting team. We just came from what I can say was probably the worst race we had results wise all weekend, all season. From a performance perspective, it was okay. Lewis and Charles were pretty strong. Both of them did really well qualifying, and they were doing pretty decently till the point of the race when both of their races, fell apart. But obviously, Lewis has the penalty, 5 grid drop. So even if he qualifies on pole, best he'll have is like P6. And I mean, I don't think Ferrari would be good enough to even get to pole this weekend. I think if they're really good, we could see them on the second row maybe. We could see maybe Leclerc has magic here. We could see him do really well. But Ferrari will be bringing obviously some upgrades. When it comes to Monza, Ferrari always brings like some special sauce there. Every single season, even when they have a bad season, well, apart from like 2020, if you guys remember 2020, apart from like 2020, most of the time they usually have some secrets, they usually have something. It's usually that low package, that low downforce package. It's usually like really good compared to other teams' low packages, low downforce packages. So it's like they really have to perform here. So the article here is just Fred Vasseur talking about how they really need to be flawless. They really need to make sure that everything comes out, everything is perfect. And yeah, when it comes to Ferrari here, I don't know, guys. Like honestly, I think Ferrari is in a position right now where they need a lot of changes because year after year, different drivers, different champions. We've had Alonso, we've had Vettel, we've had now obviously Hamilton, and the team kind of stays in the same position. They're like there's memes of them being like the Arsenal of Formula One, like top three but never first. They always perform well, but then they never win. They never really, like last year was so close, and coming into this season was like okay, they finished the season with basically the joint fastest car with McLaren, but then with all the changes they made to the car, the suspension, they changed so many things on this year's car. If you guys look at any technical things, they changed so many things on the car, but the car basically has got slower. Like last season, they were comfortably at the end of the season. They were comfortably challenging McLaren. They were comfortably ahead of Mercedes and Red Bull, but now they are just, you know, and that's the thing. I don't think, honestly, if I had to put anything on it, I don't think Ferrari this season will really have more than like a race win or maybe two. If they are lucky, maybe they would have like one or two race wins, you know? And that's disappointing. Like Ferrari is disappointing us, guys. If you guys, yeah, it's really disappointing. Like Charles Leclerc is the driver. Like I'm a Charles fan, obviously, so my biases might be there. But like Charles Leclerc, I think is probably one of the best drivers we've had in F1 for like the longest time. From like 2019 till date, Charles Leclerc is one of the best drivers we've had. Obviously, he's had his mistakes. He's been crash prone a few years, especially 2022. I think he was starting to over push when Ferrari was starting to slow down. But as he's got progress, his career has progressed. I think he's become one of the best drivers, all round drivers. I think he could easily go toe to toe with any driver on the grid right now.